the June 10th of 14th in Lamont, introduced by the Dr. Yong He, the Columbia alumni and common friends for lunch. This is the first time I met Julian, and this is a 10 years friendship between us. Julian, please.
Thank you, Jim. And you saw my speech. And I really want to proclaim today, October 4th, to be Julian's grandfather's day. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why later. But first of all, I really want to thank EALAC. Great. And I'm so sorry, I didn't want to say Professor Tuttle, but really should be Professor Tuttle. And Larry Koch, who knows a lot about my grandfather than I ever did. That's the truth. Okay. So really want to thank you guys and EALAC. And how do I get to EALAC? Because of the Starr Library, East Asian Library. And that's Jim and Washington. Where's Washington? And it's just one thing leads to another. And how do I get to the Starr Library? And then come to Huaiyin, China Institute, and run one. And would you believe, a decade ago to the date, we had Jim and Huaiyin had a book launch of my maternal grandfather, Xiao Yuifang's biography at Columbia University, October 4th, 2014. And that's the reason why today is my grandfather's day. Now, aside from recognizing these two gentlemen and their organization, I really also want to recognize with Professor Lee at University of Texas, with all the support you give me. And finally, I really want to recognize one person who I couldn't find out an organization. And that's Michael Fong. Now, he found out a picture similar to this one. And he quickly told his mother and found Julian's picture. Well, do I look like? Well, I had always thought I looked better then. But anyway, Michael and I really had a lot of relationship, right? And then Michael's son grandfather has first cousin, who was also my father's first cousin. And then, the Chinese, when they're married, then the two sides of the family come together and then bring cousins. So there we are. We're born into families and who are relatives. And finally, I really want to recognize my only Suez cousin, and Ming Suez and her daughter, Kim Suez. And then we are probably the only three Suez from I am Suez, right? When I say I am Suez, I mean. And finally, I really thank everybody who comes over here, and we really want to listen to Larry. I thought calling Larry. And then one more thing. I work in IBM for 58 years. Now, I always wonder what I'm going to do after IBM. And I didn't think there was any life after IBM. But lo and behold, China Institute Columbia University gave me such a full life. And I found out that my grandfathers both, they don't keep diaries. They want us to find out what he did. I think so, right? So there you are. Right? Thank you.
So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Larry Ling-Wei. He is an assistant research fellow at the Academy in Sinica in Taiwan, and he's been a great host to a couple of our classmates, Tibetan studies graduate students who are doing important work thanks to his introduction there in Taiwan, supporting the continued study of Tibetan studies there. So after Dr. Kong's talk, Professor Huaiyin from the University of Texas in Austin will be the respondent, and then we'll have a chance to open up the floor for questions. So I'll turn it first to Dr. Kong now. Thank you.
Thank you. So first of all, I'd like to thank Julian for making this happen, and also Professor Gray Tuttle and Jing Cheng, and also Chen Zhiwang for putting things all together. So I'm kind of surprised because I haven't been here for almost 3 years, and things change a lot, especially the checking point for security policy. So thanks everyone for coming Friday morning, and I assume everyone's busy, and thanks Julian, to let me feel I'm a pop star in academia. I got a full house today, but I won't assume because you're coming for my charisma. I think Julian's will love. You got so many family members and friends logged in, and I don't want to say I'm Julian's family members, but indeed he's my very close friends. Even though we have some different ages. But here I like to, before my formal talk, I would like to present this booklet of sources of Iuming Suez. So today we are all Iuming Suez. So thank you, John. This is for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. As a EALAC graduate in Tibetan studies, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Julian for his generosity and kindness, especially for his support to family members and students in this department. So I will just try to keep my lectures within 45 minutes. So basically the topic of my lecture today is the diplomatic life of Iuming Suez and Sino-Tibetan relations in the making of modern China. And I'm Ling-Wei from Institute of History and Philology, Academia Sinica, 中央研究院 in Chinese. So here's the outline of my talk today. In addition to introduction and conclusion, I will try to start with early diplomatic life of Iuming Suez in Tibet, and try to illustrate about his diplomatic lives in India. How did he gather intelligence about Tibet and the Himalayas in Kalimbo? And later, he became the expert of Tibetan affairs in Republican China. That's the start of his diplomatic life. So I think his life matters, especially to our scholars in Sino-Tibetan studies. And also, I will, in the second part of my lecture today, I will just quickly go through the document and archival sources we have about Iuming Suez in Taiwan, and just try to briefly introduce my probably book project about chronological biography of Iuming Suez. And then I will, if I got time, I will talk a little bit about Iuming Suez, his project about coding and telegrams in the making of modern China. So here's the introductions. So why study life of Iuming Suez, or why Iuming Suez life matters to us? So as I mentioned previously, I think by studying the life of Iuming Suez, we can further understand the relationship between modern China and Tibet in a global context. It sounds like pretty ambitious, but I will try to elaborate on my argument here. And later on, because as we all know, since the late 19th century, there is a debate over like suzerainty and sovereignty in modern China, especially about the Tibetan affairs. When the late Qing China communicated with the British India, these kind of things happen. So previously, historians study diplomatic history of modern China. Got a bunch of scholarship focusing on Shanghai or Hong Kong. But here I argue that actually Tibet is very important in terms of modern Chinese understanding of this kind of international law, especially the idea of suzerainty and sovereignty. As you may know, Columbia graduates like Tang Shaoli and William Koo, Hu Weijun, they also made a great contributions for modern Chinese community to understand the difference between suzerainty and sovereignty, or 宗主权 or 主权. We already have like many scholars study on these topics. I won't waste too much time on here. So in the previous scholarship, I think scholars mainly focus on those kind of like big stars in like modern China's diplomacy, especially William Koo, because his life is well documented. And unlike Julian's grandfather, who didn't take like diaries every day, William Koo, he did. He left like tons of like materials at Bottle, I think. So if it is still at Bottle, I think so, because I checked it at Bottle when I was here. But how could like William Koo talk about Tibetan issues as a person who haven't, who never traveled to Tibet? So basically, he got his, William Koo is like well educated. He studied at Columbia. He traveled a lot, and he talks about like Tibetan issues quite a lot. To argue with like officials of British India, but he never been to Tibet. So I was curious about how did William Koo acquire this kind of knowledge about Tibet, because he quoted lots of like local knowledge and even like some Tibetan terms. So I realized, so when I was like writing up my dissertation, I realized that he got a close friend called Iuming Suez. So Dr. Chen Zhiwang introduced me to Julian, because one day, I think it's 2017, Chen Zhi mentioned that actually Iuming's grandson is based in New York City, and it's like and he's doing like engineering in IBM. So I got pretty shocked. So we catch up together and became like close friends. So I argue that in addition to like diplomatic style like William Koo, it's time to pay for our like historians to pay much attention to someone who get like practical knowledge of Tibetan affairs in Republican China. So I think Iuming Suez is the best case in this context. So so here I would like to focus on his like significant influences on Sino-Tibetan relationship in the early 20th century China. So here is Suez photo. He's quite a figure. So because like at that time, like famous or like celebrities will all submit their photos to like something like athletes. So Chinese celebrities, they could like have just like Facebook, right? Just when you
like the who's who of China.
Yeah. Who's who in China. So I published like article on Iuming Suez and Sino-Indian relationship in Dusu, which is probably one of the most magazine in Chinese readership. in 2022. So if you get interested in this topic, you can just Google it. But I mean, it's a shame. I try to turn in like a Sino-Indian relationship because everything published related to, if I mention a term like Tibet, this paper need to be censored by the United Front. So I just cut off the tongue, like a Sino-Tibetan, like Indian relationship into like, yeah, 中印关系, like Sino-Indian relationship, but you can figure out the story here. So I'd like to just like briefly introduce the historical materials, which I haven't fully included in this like collection, but we do have quite a lot of things related to Iuming Suez life. So the first thing is like regulation regarding trade between like China, British India, and also Tibet, signed up in 1893. The original copy was preserved in National Past Museum in Taiwan. And thanks to Julian, he passed like one copy of the genealogy of Iuming Suez. It's termed like the genealogy of the family of Indonglu village. So this genealogy is actually quite rare. So the only copy I could reach out, I mean, I don't know the private collection, but for the public collection is preserved in Shanghai libraries. So I got a copy from Julian. And actually in this genealogy, Iuming Suez told lots of, like he provided like several Chinese paragraphs about his early life in Tibet. So actually Iuming Suez, he said that when he was in Tibet, he made a dream. His father passed away, and the dream became true. So he felt like he got a very strong tie with his family in like Ningbo, even though he was in Tibet at that time. And also like we got like selections of documents of the Yadong or Zhongmuzong customs in Tibet. So it's about like 1911. So we also got like British Foreign Office FO archives, got fully digitalized. So it's also contain lots of things about Iuming Suez. And this collection is basically based on the diplomatic archives held by the Academic Sinica in Taipei. And we also get like many like manuscripts. Basically, it's like the copies of conference or meeting records between Iuming Suez and British diplomats. So you cannot imagine, when I was doing my field work in Japan at Kyoto University, I just randomly came across to like some secret documents scattered by like Japanese spies in early 1920s, and it mentioned Iuming Suez quite a lot. But unfortunately, I couldn't share the photos with you due to some issues because it's somehow related to Japanese imperialism. So the Japanese libraries still try to keep it in secret. But I made some quotes in my articles. But anyway, so there are lots of things. Even at Harvard Yenching, there's one copy of like Julian's grandfather Iuming Suez suggestions to the Chinese government in Beijing about Tibetan affairs. So it's almost everywhere. But I think previous scholars like Mr. Luo and also Song Yuxia, they mentioned like Iuming Suez. But I am an expert in Tibetan studies, so I did have some strengths to talk more about Tibetan affairs. So I also, based on their previous like works, I want to make some add some minor contributions for the understanding of Iuming Suez. So here is the genealogy. So we can see that Iuming Suez actually had like 4 children. So 19荣, 19王, 19仙, who's the only daughter, and also 19光. So 19荣, the eldest son of Iuming Suez, is Julian's father. So we have one. I found one document dated like 1946, preserving at Academia Historica in Taipei, mentioned the vocation of Iuming Suez children. For example, Julian's father, Shi Jiurong, at the time he served as the leader of the automobile factory belonging to the Ministry of Economy at the time, and also your uncle Shi Jiuguang, at the time he was the engineer in terms of petroleum affairs in Gansu province. So you can see that, and also like Shi Jiuhua, he was the military teachers, military professors. But Shi Jiuxian, she got left. So so I think for someone who would like to interested in the gender agency, I think Shi Jiuxian might be like a good case to take a look at it. Actually, Shi Jiuxian did participate in some important project of Iuming Suez. I will talk about this later. So here is Shi Jiuxian. So I think Julian got an interview by someone in 2022 mentioning that the whole story of Shi Jiuxian, how did he make contributions to the inventions of Jeep in China. So I think it became very important sources of over history. And here is one U.S. document dated 1929 when Iuming Suez traveling from Gothenburg, Germany to United States. So basically, it's like records, and in his vocations is written as diplomats together with other diplomats altogether, like European diplomats. Okay, I will start with my stories after introducing to the sources I used. So the story starting from Ningbo, from the Yingxian, right? So he was born in Ningbo in 1881, and later on he studied at St. John's University from 1895 to 1901. And because he was fluent in English, so after his graduate, he became the interpreter and translator, serving in the British colonial settlement in Shanghai. And so he became quite active. So at a time, because the late Qing government needs someone to communicate with British India, and they need higher. So we get documents saying that the British India suggests the Qing government to hire someone who was fluent in English and smart with integrity. So Iuming Suez got his job. So he traveled to Lhasa, Tibet, from Shanghai in 1911, before the Qing collapse. So he became the last official hired by the Qing government in Tibet, formally. So he was invited by the Manchu Amban, literally the Manchu officials in Lhasa, Tibet, called Lian Yu. He's quite famous in Tibetan studies anyway. So Suez was invited by this Manchu guy to Tibet and served as a commercial interpreter in the Bureau of Post and Telegraphs at Yangtze. So at the time, he wasn't a diplomat, but he was like a translator. But at that time, translator was very important because there were so many conflicts between the Qing and British India, just because the misunderstanding of a word. So at that time, Suez became quite active because he was the very rare, talented, guy, both trusted by the Qing government and the British government in India. So, after his arrival in central Tibet, the China proper, encountered the Wuchang uprising. So basically, the Qing government collapsed quickly in October 1911. So in December 1911, because at the time the local military powers was controlled by the Chinese army leader called Zhongyi. He was actually the Chinese military leader assigned by the Qing government in Tibet, together with Chinese soldier from Sichuan. After hearing that the Qing court collapsed, or there's like an uprising, happening in China proper, Zhongyi commissioned Iuming Suez to be the supervisor and the Chinese trade agents of Yangtze, because Zhongyi couldn't speak like a word in English, so he needs someone to help him to communicate with the British over there. So, but later on, probably 4 or 5 months later, the Dalai Lama turned his changed his attitude towards like the Manchus and Chinese or any other non-Tibetan people in Lhasa, Tibet, and it became like a turmoil, or we call it PRC historiography termed like Qu Han Sijie, the explosion of Han Chinese, which I think is might be like a little bit inaccurate, because the Manchus and also the Mongols get kicked out as well. So during these kinds of political struggle, Iuming Suez, he was like he took a responsibility to protect like the Qing officials and also the Chinese soldiers left in Tibet. So he tried to communicate with like local peoples, especially Tibetan aristocrats who also understand English. So at that time, because that not many Tibetans can speak Chinese at that time, so the English became the common language between Iuming Suez and Tibetan aristocrats over there. So in May 1912, Suez was forced to escape to Kalimpur after sending the Chinese soldiers to take refuge in India. He became the last guy escaped to Kalimpur of India from Yangtze, Tibet. So, but he didn't immediately retreat back to China proper. Instead, he insisted that he should stay in Kalimpur to gather intelligence about Tibet and British India. And he spent a few months in Kalimpur and try to communicate with the new established provisional government in Beijing. So here I will mention that my friend Dr. Rika Shakya, when he did his field work in Kalimpur, he met Mr. Sonan Gombo, and actually there is one interesting document about how did Iuming Suez try to communicate with Dashi Wangdi, who was the 13th Dalai Lama's English secretary. So the Iuming Suez tried to pay. I won't use the term like bribe, but he spent like 1,000 taels of silver, try to convince that the Tibetans in India that your guys should come back to China, and also the 13th Dalai Lama in central Tibet should pay homage to a government in Beijing, the new government in Beijing, because we got a new government saying that every ethnic group should be equal, like the Wuzhu Gonghe. So he tried to sell the ideology of Wuzhu Gonghe to the Dalai Lama through his English secretary in Kalimpur. So that's quite interesting. So here, because of his bravery and responsibility and capability in dealing with Indo-Tibetan affairs, he was promoted as a real diplomat when he got a chance to come back to Beijing after 1913. So here's one, he's one of the Suez report to Yuan Shikai, who was the first president of the Chinese provisional government in Beijing at that time. And also, Suez, he wrote lots of things about how to, change or try to enact economic policy to acquire economic interests, or to do some trade war against Anglo and Russian people, because they also have very specific geopolitical strategy, or known as the Great Game competition in Central Asia. So at that time, Iuming Suez wrote a lot of things suggesting that the Republic of China should also pay attention to trading issues between Tibet and India in 1913. So actually, if you guys knows about like the start point of like Tibet's sovereignty, these kind of things still going on nowadays. So I mean, we can trace back to the Yuan dynasty, to the 13th century, but I think that the real story is about similar convention. So actually, Iuming Suez also played a significant role in similar convention, even though he never joined the meeting formally, but he provided lots of ideas and suggestions to Cheng, the Chinese representative in the similar convention, and Iuming Suez insists in like plan China's sovereignty over Tibet. Because according to the sources he left to us, entitled Memorandum of Refuting Tibetan Proposal of Borders. This one is preserved in Harvard Ancient Library. And here's the questions, and these sources entitled like question and answer with like British ambassador Teichmann. He was quite famous. So about like 1918, William Gu and this British diplomat Eric Teichmann, they got debates over about like Tibet's sovereignty again and again. But actually, William Gu know very little about Tibet until asking like opinions from Iuming Suez. So actually, Suez, on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of China, met with British diplomats, including Teichmann and also John Jordan, many times. And the British just feel that Iuming Suez, he was like very hard to. He was a like respected enemy in diplomatic field because he knows so much about Tibet. So actually, John Jordan, the British ambassador in Beijing, got a little bit surprised, suggesting that, oh, you are a real expert in Tibetan affairs, who I haven't met before in China. So in this context, Iuming Suez kept making proposal on Sino-Tibetan borderland affairs. So this one is also from Harvard Ancient Library, and we get also one copy at Academia Sinica. Basically, the contents they were the same, but there were some minor changes in like red ink or like in interviewing. So after China quit from a similar convention, Iuming Suez did a comprehensive research and wrote like long proposal on Sino-Tibetan borderlands to the Chinese government in 1919. So here we got a lot of things. So I just mentioned this previously. So here I quote like from like the British ambassador John Jordan, who suggested that Mr. Suez, you are the expert of Tibetan issues. Today you must have something to teach me. So actually, it's like Jordan is like I won't say he's a like arrogant guy, but he did look down on some Chinese diplomats at the time who get some language like limited, or also like knowing nothing about Tibet. But he recognized that Iuming Suez was quite exceptional and like an admired enemy from the China side. So I think I would just like, for the rest part of my lecture today, I would just like briefly introduce whatever we have, because I assume not everyone sitting in this room would like to hear about story only from Tibetan perspective. But I also want to know more about why Iuming Suez matters to the history of like China's diplomacy. So for example, in this collection I edited, I tried to make like the documents related to Iuming Suez into 3 categories. But by following the original classifications of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Republic of China. So the first one is like Tibetan archives. The second one is like World War First files, and the third one is like treaty and conference files. So basically, these documents in three categories cover Iuming Suez diplomatic life from 1911 to 1927. But if we do want to study more about like Iuming Suez activities in 30s, we may consult like other sources like newsletters or even documents preserved in Academia Historica in Taipei. There are more sources. But I will just briefly introduce whatever we have in Taipei, especially at Academia Sinica where I work. So in terms of Tibetan archives, it reveals that Iuming Suez served as the supervisor of Yangtze customs during the late Qing period, as I mentioned previously. The content of these archives illustrates how Suez, as an individual navigating a time of turmoil, understood, responded to, and even actively participating the changing situation. So for the World War First archives, it presents Iuming Suez multiple negotiations with various embassies during the World War First, with the majority of exchanges occurring between the U.S. and German embassy. The content of these negotiations largely involved China's efforts to maintain neutrality and sovereignty as a neutral country at the start of the World War First. And the last part, the treaty and convention, treaty and conference files includes materials from June 1922 to March 27, covering Iuming Suez tenure as China's ambassador in Panama, in Peru, and also in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing. So during this period, from 22 to 27, Iuming Suez played an important role in facilitating the signing of a new equitable treaty between China and Peru. And also he participated in to dealing with the Huaiyin incident, when he got a chance to become like a friend with Cheng. So, and also he participated in lots of things. Also like how did China dealing with the League of Nations? There's so many things. I couldn't just cover everything today. So after this published probably in Taiwan, so you can just feel free to get a copy. So here's one document I selected from the so-called World War First file. So this document is basically talking about how did Iuming Suez negotiating with the British about the international settlements in Shanghai. And this one is about the Iuming Suez, to talk with the Austrian ambassador, Russell, about a hostage to Russians. So if you can just give you a sense, I'm not going to the detail. And this one is very important. It's about Suez trying to persuade the Peru government sign up or renew a equal treaty with the Chinese government, even though he failed in the end. And yeah. So I will focus on this one because I think Michael's here. So due to the termination of the treaty by Peru, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs reassigned Suez in serving as ambassador in the embassy in Panama. So actually, because at that time, C.T. Feng Zizhen was also as a staff in the embassy of Panama. He got acquainted with Iuming Suez. probably they knew each other previously, but based on the sources, that's the first significant overlap between Suez and Feng, because like they worked in the same embassy in Panama in 1923, and because Suez was like way more senior than City Feng at the time, I think probably Suez was like 15 or 16 years older than City Feng. So because at the time, the government, Chinese government encountered some problems about like, logistics, and the government couldn't pay the salaries to their staff in Panama on time. So that means quite important. So Suez, as his like City Feng's senior colleague, wrote a report to urge the Chinese government to pay City Feng's salary immediately. So we got the documents here. I didn't come to like make up the story. Yes, saying that like it's like City Feng's, he didn't say something back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but he urged the leaders, at least the minister, to pay the City Feng as soon as possible. So we became the friends. So, April 17th, 1925, City returned to China. So 1 year about like a year later, Suez also returned to China. So their path came across once again due to the Huaiyin incident. So it became way more close. I think because they are like brothers, during that time, I think Chinese diplomats suffer a lot from their jobs, so they became like really close to each other due to these kinds of like we're turning like 难兄难弟 in Chinese. So here's a document saying that Suez and Feng, they try to they travel together to Huaiyin to investigate the incidents, and because they both served in Panama. In the embassy over there, they already know each other, so they could collaborate with each other relatively, smoothly. Here's another document also suggesting these kinds of stuff. So the last part I want to talk today is about telegrams. It's very different from it's somehow related to. I mean, it's definitely related to diplomatic life of Iuming Suez. But in addition to diplomats, he's also like an inventor. I mean, I think it's like he's a polymath. He did lots of things. In addition to the petroleum, he also knows about like telegrams. So he did coding stuff. So here is one coding book of telegrams Suez compiled together with his 4 children, including Shi Jiuxian. They were all listed as co-authors in 1933. So I will turn these kind of things like from how did the modern China from late Chinese like multilingualism to turn it into like transcoding practice. I will elaborate on these terms later. So basically, as we know, the Qing government, in terms of like dealing with like Tibetan affairs, it heavily relied on multilingual practice, especially like translation between Tibetan, Mongolian, and Manchu. That's my real like expertise. So, Suez tried to turn this. I didn't think he intentionally did this, but he felt that coding, especially like for telegrams, is telegraphy is very important in terms of dealing Tibetan affairs. So as early as 1910s or early 20s, he mentioned that we shouldn't, borrow the telegrams systems from British India, but because at the time, whatever the Lhasa government, I mean, the Chinese government in Lhasa would like to communicate with the central government in Beijing or the government in Shanghai, they need to, borrow or rent the telegram lines of British India through the Kalimpong and to Hong Kong and to Shanghai in this way. Because at the time, Sichuan or the Kang regions was like actually controlled by like local Tibetans, powers over there. So they cut off the telephone lines established by the Qing and later the Republican governments. So the Suez suggesting that we shouldn't use the coding system invented by the British government in English. Instead, we should build up like a new system based in Chinese logic. So here is the coding book he compiled in 1933. So I argue that actually these kinds of from a multilingual practice turned into transcoding practice provide like a new information mechanism for like Chinese government's information system dealing with like Tibetan affairs. So here's my own stuff. So actually the information transmissions, especially before the early 19th century, during the Qing period. So the Qing government heavily relied on, translation, like this kind of multilingualism I termed. So they need to, for example, like for gathering intelligence about India, they relied on Tibetan-speaking people in Ladakh, or the region near to Kashmir. If you pay attention to Sino-Indian, conflicts nowadays. So from Nari in Western Tibet, the Tibetan aristocrats, gathered the information about India in Tibetan sources in 18th century. And they were first translated into Mongolian and sent into the Manchu or Mongol ambans in Lhasa, and they were translated into Manchu and pass these kind of information related to India to Beijing. So that's the way how the Qing perceived the existence of Mongol India in the 80s, in the 18th century. But Suez changed the logic about these kind of things. You can see that here we get like some coding symbols. So actually these documents is selected from the Suez telegraphs to Sinica. So at the time, for the government in Chinese government in Beijing, whatever they whenever they try to receive the information from Iuming Suez in Tibet, they need to go do the coding stuff. And I believe due to these kinds of process, Iuming Suez realized that actually coding was very important in terms of Tibetan affairs. So he compiled this coding book, which was prefaced by a very well-known Chinese banker and politician, Zhou Zuoming at the time. Zhou Zuoming was the president of the Jingcheng Bank, who became like he was bought by like a China Bank in Hong Kong in 2021. I don't know, but you can check it. So he did leave. Zhou Zuoming left legacy to modern China, and also the Taiping Insurance, which is still very active in mainland China nowadays. So Zhou Zuoming also served as the CEO of Taiping Insurance at the time. So you can see that in his preface, he said, a coding book compiled by Shijun Aishi, Suez, because his alias is Aishi, is very abundant, and the usage is very broad. And it will I would predict, I expect it will be very, very popular. So Zhou Zuoming, a very important politician and banker at the time, highly evaluate this coding book compiled by Iuming Suez. So it's the content coding book. I'm not actually coding, so I'm not going to evaluate his achievements here, but I would like to highlight the role of his family, especially Iuming Suez's children. So here we found the name of Shi Jiuqian in addition to his three sons. So actually they worked together for this coding book. So it's quite amazing. They even established, probably it's not a real company, but it becomes like a 时事参与电码编辑室. Okay, so here's the last part of my conclusion. So briefly, from July 1911 to July 12, Suez witnessed the radical change of Tibet before and after the Xinhai Revolution. And from May 1912 to May 1913, he stayed in Kalimpong, India, where he collected British and Tibetan intelligence for the Chinese government, or the provisional government of China at the time. So from 1913 to 1918, he served as a basic level diplomat in the Chinese government. In his early career, because of his like bravery and like talents dealing with like Tibetan affairs with British India, he got promoted to this position from like just like a translator. Though he was young, the Chinese government relied on his expertise of Tibetan affairs heavily, and his opinions on Tibet and Britain influenced China's policy of Tibet significantly. And Suez also had great contributions to Chinese telegraph coding. This might be related to his early experiences in Tibet and India. So here I would like to provide like some thoughts about my research connection in the future. So probably we can think about the diplomacy, about the big terms like sovereignty, neutral nations, escaped prisoners, these kind of things, I'm Suez, dealing with, which I don't have enough time to explain or include in my presentation today. And also the history of technology. So how did telegraphy and the petroleum industry connected with Suez family? Of course, like Iuming Suez's third son became like a very important figure, especially like engineer of petroleum in Gansu province. And even after 1949, Suez family played a significant role in terms of like petroleum industry in China. So I think for someone interested in the history of technology, I mean, Iuming Suez could also be a very important figure to study. And also about like public and private, there's always like a dialectical relationship between individual figures and state power. So in addition to like those like well-known or relatively well-known figures like William Hu or like Yuan Shikai, I think we should pay much close attention to someone like Iuming Suez, who was the real guy, who had been to Tibet on his own. So if I still get 1 minute, I will talk about like OCR test. So because everyone is talking about digital humanities, and we also I don't know the Chinese like reading skills of students here, but in Taiwan we got some problems. It's really difficult to train everyone to read like Chinese cursive writing documents. So I try, because we have like a team of like digital humanities at Sinica, or even more than one team. So I think because Julian works for IBM for a long while, so I think it might be interesting in these kind of things like AI technology. So because I need to apply, to be honest, I need to hire like some assistants for me to edit this collection. So I need to use some term like AI to get funding from Taiwan government, especially from Sinica. So I use like lots of like OCR technology or tools from ABY, ChatGPT, or even like a Kandian developed by, I think it's by Alibaba or like Tencent in PR China nowadays, and try to. So I found it actually for like Chinese characters, Kandian, these tools very useful. But for like European languages like ABY, ChatGPT should be fine. So here's the one example. So if I get a chance to teach at Columbia or any other universities, we can test like graduate students how to transliterate this Chinese text about Iuming Suez. So if you use ABBYY, it makes nonsense. For ChatGPT, there are still lots of mistakes. But for Kandian, I don't want to promote Alibaba or like Tencent, but they did real stuff. I think the percentage of correction is like more than 70%. So, but is still not reliable in terms of like serious academic research. So I want to legitimize that, it's still necessary to cultivate like PhD students here. So thanks to Julian for your generosity. I believe we still need, as a historian or scholars in humanities, I don't think AI can replace the rules of our scholars. But I think it can be helpful, especially to like unprevious students or like non-expert in Chinese history or like Tibetan history. These kind of things could be like helpful to us to actually to do some like transcriptions of Chinese documents. Okay, basically that's my talk today. Thank you so much.
And now I'd like to invite Professor Lee to probably make some comments.
Okay, thank you.
Good day, everyone. I'm really excited to fly to New York City and participate in this important event. And thanks to Gray for inviting me here. And also thank Mary for fascinating presentation. I have learned a lot from your lecture about the life of Iuming Suez and his involvement in Tibetan affairs. And above all, I'd like to thank Julian for your generous donations to the University of Texas and Austin and to Columbia University that enabled the establishment of the Iuming Suez lecture series at both universities. And I hope your endowment to us will help us facilitate our exchanges between the two universities. And more faculty members and graduate students will be able to come over here to utilize the exceptional wealth of archives and special collections at Columbia University. And while I'm honored to serve as a respondent to various lectures, I have to admit that I'm not a specialist in Tibetan studies, and I don't really have much to respond to your lecture. But nevertheless, I did some homework before coming here, and what I did is to see how much has been done by Chinese historians and researchers on the lives of Iuming Suez. And to my surprise, I found that there have been 77 articles that are published in Chinese that contain the name of Iuming Suez. So from those results, I'd like to pick a few and share with you just two anecdotes about Iuming Suez's career as diplomat. And one of them has to do with an event that took place right here in New York City, and not too far from Columbia University. It was the International Exposition of Silk, organized by the Silk Association of America in 1921. And the location is a building that's called the Grand Central Palace. I doubt not everyone knows where it is because it was demolished in 1964. It's located somewhere between Lexington and 44 or 45. So that's a huge event in which the organizer secured 45 rooms from that building for the exhibits of silk products from different countries. And China, of course, is a major producer of silk for many centuries. But by the 1920s, Japan had outcompeted China in the global silk industry. So Iuming Suez, as the Consul General of the Republic of China in the New York City, felt it obligatory to have a showcase of Chinese silk in this huge event. And he negotiated with the organizer to rent an area, I guess it's about more than 1,500 square feet. And the rent was very expensive. It's about $2.50 per square feet. So the total cost would be almost $400. But nevertheless, he negotiated to cut the rate to just $200. And then he spent a lot of time to invite Chinese silk producers to participate. And in the end, 3 silk factories from Hangzhou and Shanghai sent their products to the event. And Iuming Suez received, I guess, let me give you specific numbers, 48 bolts of silk in different colors and different quantities. But 48 bolts of silk, that's far from enough to fill the 1,500 square feet. So he had to turn to his friends in New York City to borrow from them silk products or whatever, decorations in silk, and to make this exhibition happen. So this is the first time that Chinese silk producers showcase their products on such an international occasion. And Iuming Suez was indispensable in making this happen. So that's one of the stories, I guess, that impressed me. And the other took place in the summer of 1937. That's when Japan started a full-scale invasion into North China. The nationalist government of China was in desperate need of fossil fuel to sustain its military operation. But China does not produce gasoline at that time, and there was not a single oil field in China. And for years, China had counted on the imported gasoline, mostly imported by Mobil and Shell. But after the war started, the cost of shipping this fuel to China escalated, and both Shell and Mobil cannot continue their business. That's increasingly dangerous. So the only solution appears to be for China to find an oil field itself to produce gasoline on itself. And that task fell to Iuming Suez, who was trusted with the job of putting together a geological investigation group to start the exploration of possible deposit of oil. And they identified an area. That's the long, narrow region between the northern edge of the Tibetan Plateau and the southern edge of the Gobi Desert. We call that the corridor west of the Yellow River, Hexizhou. So Iuming Suez organized such a group consisting of 11 members. 2 of them are from America, who are the leading geologists. I have their name. Marvin Weather and Fred Sutton, as well as 9 other Chinese geologists and workers. So there's start their trip from Shanghai, and in a few weeks they arrived in Xi'an and then Lanzhou, where they witnessed the Japanese air raids. And from there, they proceed to Jiuquan. That's on the edge of the Huaiyin corridor. And for the next 3 months, or almost 100 days, they traversed back and forth along the corridor. And at night, they slept in tents or abandoned temples. And they had no shower, no shaving, no hair washing for 3 months. So when they finished the survey, everyone got lots of flea bites. But nevertheless, they succeeded in identifying an oil field, which was later on known as the Iuming Suez. So next year, the nationalist government started the construction of the oil field. And in 1939, oil drilling started. For the next 20 years, that oil field would produce 90% of gasoline for China. So Iuming Suez name is always remembered in China when people talk about the beginning of China's oil industry. So I use these 2 stories just to illustrate how rich and how important the diplomatic career of Iuming Suez was in China's modernization and in cultivating the economic ties between China and the United States. And it's fitting that we gather here today to commemorate his achievement and to start the Iuming Suez lecture series at this particular juncture in U.S.-China relations. Thank you very much.
Now we could just open the floor for questions, and I can invite you all to contribute. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm very interested in the brief discussion we had about the Sinica conference. Whatever the treaty that the British to impose, today nobody recognizes the treaty being legitimate, correct?
Yeah, that's the interesting, very interesting, important questions about the Sinica conference. So it really depends because, like at a time, 1913 to 1914, the Tibetan government became like independent de facto. So
I'm sorry.
Independent. The Tibetan government became like independent de facto. Yeah. So even though the China claims, it's sovereignty over Tibet, the 13th Dalai Lama suggesting that, argue that actually the Tibetans get freedoms and independence from China at that time. I mean, that's the quote. Actually, it's not my opinion, but I know we are. But that's a history. And Iuming Suez realized the fact he tried to fix a problem with the Tibetans. So instead of use very violent words against the Tibetan government at the time, he tried to do things or solve the problems in a more practical ways. Money. So he wired, as I mentioned, according to the document shared by Dr. Igashaka with me. So actually, through the Citibank in Hong Kong, Iuming Suez wired lots of silver to the Tibetan government and also Tibetans in Kalimpong at that time, and also with the help of Chinese, especially probably many of you heard about one figure called Luce, who's a Cantonese leader in Chinatown in Kalimpong, who became close friends of Iuming Suez with his help. I think the Chinese government did buy the support of Tibetans and Chinese people in Kalimpong, India at the time. So that's the contributions of Iuming Suez. I'm not going to praise him, but according to, the fact is Iuming Suez played a significant role in modern China's development. Basically, that's yeah.
I conclude from what you just said. Therefore, the similar conference and the treaties are null and void from an international law point of view. Is that correct?
Based on PR China, obviously, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
But
If that is correct, then what is its relationship to the McMahon line that was drawn later?
well, that's a big question. So that's why we should have like program non-independent studies here because we can. Well, I think we can spend like several weeks on this issue.
Just give me the short answer.
Yeah. So I don't want to oversimplify as like historian, but basically the Sinica Convention, from the Tibetan and the British, perspective, the McMahon line was like settled down, during the convention, whereas the Republican Chinese government, didn't recognize it, and it turns out it became like lots of like dirty things still happening on the Sino-Indian borderlands. I mean, 2020s there's like serious border conflicts. I mean, it's all left by the legacy of British India. So I think it deserves like further studies in the future. That's it.
No, I didn't understand the answer. What's the relationship from the McMahon line today? Is that still null and void?
It depends on the perspective. I mean, from the PR China, it's definitely involved. Yeah.
Maybe next year we can invite the same year that Ling-Wei graduated. We had the same year that Ling-Wei graduated from Columbia's Modern Tibetan Studies program. We had an Indian scholar graduate from our program as well, and she's teaching at an Indian university, teaching Chinese history at an Indian university. So maybe next year we'll invite her to talk about, how the Indian government kind of inherited the British understanding of that relationship, that special.
The short answer from what I hear you say is that McMahon line is still a point of debate.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the short answer, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, it's still on debate, but I mean, I'm not going to support it. Either spot.
We use the nationalist.
Yes, please.
So I think Professor Lee did a very good job kind of highlighting in the 20s. I think there's a lot of interesting. What was like the next two lecture, right? This in terms of diplomats in Central America and South America in the 20s, and then in the 30s and beyond, right? I guess with Shi Guang also, like in terms of petroleum industry development that really deserve a lot of research. But I was curious from your research, Larry. After 1920, did the Chinese government consult Iuming Suez on Tibetan because of his expertise, right? Have you found any kind of materials that show that?
It's mainly, that's a good question. So mainly like before 1920s, because later he moved on. It became like quite interesting, even in Inner Mongolia. So we got like another report about like Iuming Suez in the I think 20s and 30s about his suggestions about the development of Inner Mongolia at that time. So because like after the 20s, there are more and more like things he need to do. So he shifted from Tibetan affairs to like other like international affairs, like Huaiyin incidents or like the situation about like the Chinese migrants in Panama. So his work became way more diverse, not only limited in Tibetan affairs. Yeah, after the 20s. Thank you.
And Danny Cheng, he's a current PhD student here, comes to us from the Google Museum of Hong Kong.
Thank you. I would like to ask, it seems that according to the timeline that you've shown us about Iuming Suez, right, that he actually spent around half a year in Ganzhou and then actually 1 year in Kalimpong, perhaps among Tibetan communities and Chinatown. So I'm just a bit curious that for that period of time, it seems like for us PhD students, it seems like field work, right? You know, like, so what actually, are there any evidence or are there any written, any form of archives which demonstrated what kind of knowledge or what kind of specialty or expertise that he actually developed, like in that field work period? Because we know that even the British, for example, the British ambassador, you told us that he felt that he's so knowledgeable and he's got something to teach him, right? So, but we know that British India has been dealing with Tibet and the Tibetan government for quite a prolonged period of time. So for Iuming Suez to be respected that highly, it means that he definitely does something extraordinary, right? So I'm just curious about what's that is higher on the pedestal that the British Indian ambassadors and the governments highly treasure or at least highly respected.
I don't want to flatter Julian's family, but I think it's about his personality. He's just good at like making friends. I mean, because like going back to the periods of late Qing, like Manchu and Mongol Ambans, those kinds of like old style officials, they like pay to speak like English, the language of barbarians, and they have their own culture to have pigtails, to have to smoke opiums. It's a part of their identities to be like barbarians, because they were all from like Manchu and Mongolian aristocratic families. So they look down at the British diplomats. They think you guys are not, just like barbarians. But for someone like Iuming Suez, he was like educated like in Shanghai, and he became at St. John's, and he was like quite fluent in English, gathered some basic knowledge of international law, and served as like translators in like international settlement in Shanghai. So he was very, I would say, diplomatic before he became a diplomat, formal diplomat. So the British guys, those British guys just liked him and respected him. And I think he made himself successful. He wasn't trained as a real diplomat at St. John's, but just like a translator or So I think he could be like a model to undergraduate. It's not necessary to to get into a law school or like to be a diplomat, but try to be a nice person. I think that's the way of like the humanities want to teach us at Columbia. So I think please take like core curriculum with Professor Tuttle. Just try to be a nice person and volunteer. Sure.
Maybe I'll ask a question, because you brought up land the last answer of Anban, and I kind of wonder why, say, a place like the Xizang Zhongshan has not elevated the work, because they tend to collect the works of important Ufengpe or whoever the important Tibetan studies scholars or the Tibetan officials and so forth. So why haven't they paid attention to Iuming Suez? Are the documents that he wrote maybe too diplomatic and too nuanced that the Chinese government doesn't want to sort of collect them into one source and put them together? Are they too balanced and so they kind of often what we teach here is that sometimes there are topics that neither the Tibetan government in exile nor the Chinese government in Beijing wants to pay attention to. So can you talk a little bit, having looked at these documents? Is there something about them that the current PRC government hasn't elevated this work, put it together, repackaged it, and sold it, as they've done with so many other Tibetan studies scholars or officials?
I think probably it's just about because you really need to take a look at primary sources. And the problem is that I don't want to say something bad for scholars over there, because they also did something amazing. But right now, everyone just doing something quite big, like get a slogan, about 中华民族, how to promote the identities of 中华民族 instead of reading those kind of very they use the like term like a sporadic or 碎片化. Just like doing this kind of academic research is not important at all as a historian. Historian kind of missions to legitimize why the PRC or the CCP take over the legitimacy of China. But I think if they did want to make this argument, it's their freedom. But I think as a historian, I prefer to read the primary sources, especially documents. And to your questions, to be honest, I don't know why they didn't pay serious attention to someone like Iuming Suez, who was like actually he could fit into these kinds of discourse because he did play like significant role trying to, promote ideas of 中华民族 or like a republican spirits to the Tibetans in central Tibet or even in India at the time. He did succeed in certain cases, but obviously Tibetans still kept very strong identities. They just received money from him and did nothing. So yeah, but I think his life deserves like a further research in the future.
So on this mission to Tibet, he was a diplomat. But do you ever study how much was he an economist or a trade representative?
Yeah, that's a good question. So he's definitely not trained as like a specialized economist, but he did, have some comments about how did the Chinese government should like, enact like a specific trading policy against like the British and Russians in Central Asia, especially in Tibet, because he served at a post of Gyamtse, right? So he suggests he used a term like Oya Samzai, like Eurasian trading war, to raise the attention from Yuan Shikai. Because as like a world war, in Beijing at the time, Tibet is just like a very, very like a strange place. Nobody cares about like Tibet at the time. But he tried to persuade Yuan Shikai, suggesting that, okay, you're like leaders, you're respectful, like the president, together with those ministers of foreign affairs, you guys should pay serious attention to this place, Tibet, especially Gyamtse and also Zhongmozong Yadong customs, because like British India and Russian empires, they all have like a very, very, very specific geopolitical and like trading policy targeting this place. So he used like a very strong word in a very elegant way to persuade Yuan Shikai to pay attention to Tibetan affairs. And his like suggestions actually, partially, admitted or permitted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and took over by William Koo later. So he did have some importance in terms of policy making at the time.
Thank you again, Ling-Wei Tong. Thank you again. Thanks, Professor Lee, for coming up from Texas. And we'll invite you back next year.